speakers today are Robin Broad and John Cavanaugh. Among the many things that each of them has accomplished in their lives, Robin is a research professor at American University, and John is a longtime director, now senior advisor at the Institute for Policy Studies. Together, they've been involved in Salvadoran gold mining struggle since 2009, helped build a network of international allies, of which WES is a member, and co-authored the award-winning page-turner book, The Water Defenders. Truly, it's hard to put down once you start. The Water Defenders, How Ordinary People Saved a Country from Corporate Greed. It is with deep gratitude and solidarity that we welcome Robin and John here today.
Podium setups. And of course, we return that deep gratitude. It's an honor to be with you all this morning on Human Rights Day. Special thanks to Peggy, to Ross, to Emily, to the tech team, and Lilo, although you probably would rather have him keep singing than listen to me. And anyone else who put in extra efforts to put this event together. John and I were told that the topic we were speaking on is water and human rights, a fitting topic for Human Rights Day. And we are both deeply humbled by you all at the Washington Ethical Society and the selfless and generous support you have given to El Rodeo, El Salvador over the years. And I can't see those screens, but there should be 3 different photos that are showing. We're delighted to have you here, but we also wanted to bring in people from El Salvador. So what you should be seeing is a photo of an audience listening to us and others in El Salvador. It looks like there's only men in that picture, but they're not. It's just the way I took the picture. It's my fault. You also should be seeing the 2 of us with WES friends in El Salvador, Vidalina, Manuel, Jaime, and others, I think most of whom have spoken here. And then the final photo is a picture of Salvadoran legislators, congressional people, who John will talk about more. So that's just to make us real in terms of where we are. As John and I planned for today, we decided that the best way to do our small part in today's ceremony events was to introduce these issues first by getting you into the story, much the same way as we got into it in 2009, then to pull out some of the major themes, lessons, and questions that we found ourselves truly grappling with as we worked with international allies and wrote and reconstructed the events, and of course, leaving lots of time for your reflections. So to begin, I have a brand new iPhone. To begin, as we began in 2009, I'm going to read for about 10 minutes from the introduction to our book, The Water Defenders. For nearly 2 weeks, Marcelo Rivera's family could not find him. Then, on June 29, 2009, they received a phone call they had been dreading. The anonymous caller was brief. There was a body in an old abandoned well just west of the Rivera hometown of San Isidro Cabañas. The well was near the spot where Marcelo had last been seen some 12 days earlier, getting off the bus at a turnaround to the capital city. During those 12 days, Marcelo's family and friends had been at wit's end, searching frantically, desperately for him. They had spread the news of his disappearance in all barrios of San Isidro and nearby town. They had called the police for over a week, to no avail. The Rivera family had even filed a formal complaint with the country's attorney general, pleading for him to conduct a search and an investigation into Marcelo's disappearance. But another poor person gone missing up in the rural north meant little to the authorities. After the anonymous tip to Marcelo's family, the police finally acted. They pulled the remains of a body out of the dry 30-meter deep well. So extensive was the torture that the body was unrecognizable. The face was grotesquely disfigured. No jaw, no lips, no nose. The fingernails had been ripped off. The testicles bound. The trachea had been broken with a nylon cord. In the assessment of the coroner, the death had been caused by asphyxiation. The public prosecutor disagreed, concluding that the death had come from the blows to the head by a hammer. Thus, Marcelo Rivera became the first of several water defenders to be assassinated in the 21st century fight over mining in northern El Salvador. Though we had never met Marcelo, we have been haunted by him and the circumstances of his death ever since. Who killed Marcelo and why? Perhaps you know the difference between a pupusa and a tortilla, or perhaps, like we had done, you are entering this story without a clue. Perhaps El Salvador is not even on your radar screen, or perhaps El Salvador is on your radar screen only because of the gangs or immigrants who trek north. But really, that does not matter. Certainly, on one level, this is a story about El Salvador. At the same time, it is not just about El Salvador. This is a David versus Goliath story about a battle between a country and a foreign mining company. But it is also about how global corporations, be they big gold or big pharma or big tobacco or big oil or big banks, move into poorer communities in countries all over the world. Marcelo's story, before and after his death, is about the struggle for clean and affordable water everywhere. It is also a story about workers and communities defending their air and land, their health and their climate, and their rights to defend themselves against corporate incursion, about how to prioritize the rights and common good versus the usual prioritization of the profits of big corporations and their owners. It is certainly a story about gold and when and why we should leave it in the ground. But it could also be about coal or natural gas or other fossil fuels, about whether we measure progress in aggregate financial terms or through the well-being of all people and the planet, and about who gets to make the decision that affect our and their lives. To say that this story of the water defenders versus big golds holds keys to reversing the outside power, oversized power of global corporations today is not an exaggeration. You may find yourself surprised by the relevance of the strategies of the water defenders in El Salvador, whether your focus is on a Walmart in Washington, D.C., a fracking company trying to expand in Texas or Pennsylvania or Maryland, or petrochemical companies outside New Orleans. Along the way, however cliched the quote attributed to Margaret Mead may have become, you may also find yourself inspired by a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens who stand up to corporate power. We first heard of Marcelo in May 2009, just a month before his murder. He was a 37-year-old teacher who directed his hometown's cultural center, an avid reader, a person who loved theater and the arts, and a good practical joke. We heard his name because he was the leader of the main coalition of Salvadoran groups opposed to mining, the National Roundtable on Mining in El Salvador, La Mesa. The Roundtable was not well known outside of El Salvador, but we learned of it because the group had been chosen to receive a prestigious human rights award from the Institute for Policy Studies, where John works. In 2009, the Institute had selected La Mesa to honor its opposition to mining companies eager to exploit the gold deposits near El Salvador's major river. On a misty night in 2009, some of you were there, just months after Marcelo's body was pulled from the well, hundreds gathered at the National Press Club in downtown Washington, D.C. to meet and applaud the Salvadoran water defenders. Among them was Marcelo's youngest brother and best friend, Miguel. Miguel had come in his brother's place. Grief marked his face. Accepting the award on behalf of Miguel and 3 other La Mesa members was a peasant and community leader from the heart of Gola country, Vidalina Morales. She at first appeared hesitant, nervous before the large audience, fragile even. But then she began to speak. Her voice filled the auditorium, almost as though she did not need the microphone. For nearly 20 minutes, Vidalina held the crowd spellbound as she relayed the saga of El Salvador's water defenders standing up to big gold. The Lempa River, she explained, winds through the country like a snake, providing water for over half the population, water for drinking, for fishing, for farming, water for the cities as well as the rural areas. But the project of the Canadian headquartered Pacific Rim Mining Company at its proposed El Dorado site in Miguel and Marcelo's hometown posed serious threats to the Lempa River. Key among the dangers was the toxic cyanide that Pacific Rim would use to separate the gold from the rock. Vidalina ended her acceptance speech that night with a seemingly audacious demand that the government of El Salvador stand up to giant mining firms and choose water over gold by banning the mining of all metals. All metals. Before this, Vidalina had urged the audience to follow a related legal thriller unfolding 4 blocks to the west of where we sat, just past the White House, to the site of a little-known tribunal at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. There, as Vidalina explained, PAC-RIM had filed a lawsuit against the government of El Salvador just before Marcelo's murder. The mining company claimed that El Salvador had to either allow it to mine or to pay the company over $300 million in costs and foregone profits from future mining. Vidalina invoked the upside-down world summoned by Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano in asking why it was not El Salvador suing PAC-RIM, since the mining company threatened the water and well-being of her country. But that upside-down world is the reality of giant corporate power and economic rules that affect people around the world. And as John and I think back to that evening, we must confess that we each, separately and silently, found it just as far-fetching to imagine a national legislature passing a law to end mining as it was to conceive of this World Bank tribunal siding with Vidalina and the rest of the water defenders. At the reception following the awards ceremony, we huddled with Marcelo's brother, Miguel. Miguel was soft-spoken and gentle in his manner, understandably a bit shy as he asked for help. After all, we had just met. He seemed both incredibly focused on the details of what to do next, and at the same time, shell-shocked by the chain of events, by his brother's murder, and by the lawsuit. But Miguel's appeal was urgent, direct, and heartfelt. We don't know this World Bank tribunal or how it works. We don't know what to expect. Can you help us find this lawsuit? We knew we could not say no to Miguel. But on that misty evening in October 2009, who could have guessed that Miguel's questions and Vidalina's call to action would pull us two and thousands of others around the room, including many of you in the audience, into the vortex of 3 intertwined unknowns for nearly a decade to come. First, there was the on-the-ground mystery. Who killed Marcelo and why? Not just who carried out the brutal murder, but who was the mastermind. Second, there was the mystery at the national level. Could El Salvador possibly become the first nation on earth to ban mining, or at least move somewhat in that direction? And finally, the global legal thriller. Could small El Salvador possibly prevail against the global mining industry in Washington, D.C. at the World Bank? We too had no idea how these mysteries would play out, but as we joined the hundreds of people who streamed out of the National Press Club after the award ceremony, we knew we were hooked. Now let me turn this over to John, who's going to share some of our collaborative reflections on some of the big lessons that this work and reconstructing the events in this book have raised for us, bringing us up to the current period, and then we will be quiet so that we can learn and listen. We can listen and learn from you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robin, and to all of you, to Lilo, to many friends who are here tonight. Robin and I are here in part to celebrate all of you and to celebrate WES for your accompaniment of the communities in El Salvador in their tireless work to protect water and to protect their rivers from the toxic pollution of mining. And I also just want to say personally, from my vantage point, I've worked for 40 years at the Institute for Policy Studies, a lot of it, 34 of those years with the dad of our amazing congressman just to the northeast of us here, Jamie Raskin. Mark Raskin was the co-founder of IPS. And over the years, we've had many wonderful collaborations with all of you. So thank you on that. What I'm going to do, as Robin said, is share a few words from both of us on the role. It's picking up where Peggy started on the role that international solidarity can play and did play in this struggle, including, I want to tell you a little bit, many of you were involved of it, some of you weren't, but the critical role that WES played. And I'm going to end by inviting you, for those of you who are free on January 10th of 2024 at 4 p.m. to join us 3 miles south on beautiful 16th Street in front of the Salvadoran Embassy. Let me pause just for a second because Robin alluded this, but just saying how beautiful it is to join you on this particular day, which is the annual celebration of human rights around the world. It's the 75th anniversary of one of the greatest global documents of all time, the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And so I want to propose a toast to Eleanor Roosevelt at this moment, who championed the document and played such a key role in its creation and passage in 1948. So those of you who are joining us online with coffee, go Eleanor Roosevelt. And some of you know that history. I'm not going to digress into it, but just to say there have been a ton of advances in the struggle for international human rights since then. And I do want to mention just one that was the result of a huge amount of struggle of groups and communities around the world, which was that 13 years ago, the United Nations General Assembly recognized the human right to water and sanitation. And it led to a lot of wonderful activities around the world right up till this time. Okay, now, quickly, I want to start by just saying a word about the 3 mysteries where Robin ended, because some of you don't know how this laid out. On the first one, yes, in March 2017, El Salvador became the first nation on earth to ban all metals mining to save its rivers. It did so in a deeply divided country and legislature through a unanimous vote of 70-0. All political parties. Amazing. 2, 6 months earlier in October 2016, that secretive World Bank tribunal that Robin mentioned voted unanimously against the mining company that sued El Salvador. Also amazing. It is in the third mystery that we don't have as good news. Who ordered the killing of Marcelo Rivera? And here we are 14 years later, and we still don't know what in Latin America they would call the intellectual authors of that. Who ordered the murder? Although there are many strong indications of where that might go. Okay, so I want to mention 4 key moments in the fighting for and winning this human right to water. And I love the quote from Frederick Douglass about struggle. So think about that as you hear these. And WES members have been involved in all of them. And if you have not already, you might put up that first photo deck, because you're going to see some photos of some of this. So the first one, in 2016, the big win against this secretive tribunal at the World Bank. I just want to say that WES was a key part of this fight. A part of what we did was simply to expose to the world what this tribunal was all about. It's one of the least just legal formations in the world. So we did a huge amount of writing about that. We did a lot of protesting outside the World Bank. And it's interesting, this is an institution, I know many of you know of it, but it's one of the biggest employers in Washington. Over 18,000 people work for the World Bank around the world, the majority of them here. And so I just want to mention one other of the pieces of this. There are photos of the protests there. But a great idea that the early risers among you joined in on many days leading up to 2016. This was an idea from Ron Carver, who's a great labor organizer down here in the front row. But we went at 8 in the morning. So of those roughly 10,000 people who work in this giant city block downtown, most of them enter the building, we figured out, between 8 and 9 a.m. So we went down several times early in the morning. You all helped make signs. I mean, this was one of the signs that we used at the protests and in the leafleting. And we passed out leaflets, short leaflets with a graphic that explained what was going on and explained to these people walking into the building, many of whom are good people and ethical people, about this deeply unethical thing that was going on in their building. And I just want to say you get prizes for better than my fellow people at the Institute for Policy Studies for being early risers and great poster makers. I mean, this is a professional piece here, but you also are great at making posters. So that's the first one. Second, the win in 2017, this historic vote. I mean, imagine this is as if Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer got together and voted on something, not just like the naming of a post office, but on something truly monumental for the United States, and came together and got all of their members to vote with them. The book gets a lot into what the people on the ground did. So the 90% of the victory is their smarts, 10% of it was the international solidarity. But just to mention a couple of things. First, amazing grassroots organizations on the ground. Peggy referred to this Association of Economic and Social Development led by one of the arrested friends, Antonio Pacheco. They led an amazing effort of mobilization. Key to it, and many of you I know have been involved in community struggles, but was terrific education done by people. Most people there had no idea whether mining was good or bad. They had no idea that it used cyanide. They had no idea the horrible effects it could have on rivers and on land. They went to Honduras to mines. They went to eastern El Salvador to mines. They educated themselves. They educated their communities, and they did it brilliantly. And you can't win a fight without that. Second one, which maybe sounds obvious, this sounds like a fight against mining, and it is. They framed the entire fight in terms of the fight for water. Their slogans were, "Water is life. We can live without gold, but we can't live without water." And I think Robin, in the first part, when Robin was speaking, one of those 3 photos is very, well-dressed people holding big signs that say in Spanish, "Water is life." Those were legislators who had just walked out of the assembly when they had the historic vote in 2017, and all of their campaign was pro-water, was water is life. Turns out very few people are opposed to water. We learned in this. And then finally, brilliant work in building a set of allies, both the likely ones and the unlikely ones. You are among the likely ones. They turn to people in the faith community, people in the environmental community, people in the labor community. But I really want to applaud our allies in El Salvador for realizing, just like in the US, you're not going to win anything unless you can reach unlikely allies, reach across the aisle. And they did this by reaching out to, for example, an extremely conservative Opus Dei Archbishop of El Salvador, who it turned out was a chemist and knew the horrible impacts that cyanide would have on water and land. It included reaching out to a conservative minister of the environment who had been part of the death squad governments of El Salvador during the Civil War, who it turns out actually cared about the law. It included an action that Robin played a key role in, of bringing a governor from halfway around the world, from the Philippines, whose community, whose province had been devastated by a mine of the same mining company. So really want to salute them and salute you all, though, for the 10% of this fight that was outside pressure by international allies in research and protest, and in other activities hand in hand with Salvadorans. So that's the second moment I just want to mention. The third I won't get into, but it's the one that you all created. I was just in El Salvador last month on a delegation with Ross Wells from WES and others from the United Church of Canada and elsewhere. And I forced Ross, sitting in the Salvadoran airport for 3 hours, to tell me the whole story of your work with this community of El Rodeo. And I simply want to say, the rest of the struggle we describe in the book is about a fight to change a law, a mining ban in El Salvador, a fight to change unjust economic rules, this tribunal at the World Bank. All of these are critical to the right to water. But the right to water means something to ordinary people when you bring it into their homes. So the community you picked in 2009, the remarkable work you did to build a plan with them that got to their needs to have water. We visited Vitalina before. Her house is up on a hill up above a river. People carried water up every day. The things we take for granted they didn't have there. You worked with them to conceptualize a water system. You worked with Antonio Pacheco, the beautiful leader of the Water Defenders, to design a system. You worked it through. You figured out how to finance it. It's as gripping a story as the one we tell in the Water Defenders. And I just want to salute you with the way you did it. And I'm sitting here looking at you, I'm thinking of the 18,000 people at the World Bank, how they do their projects, top down, encumbering people with loans they can't repay. And I think about how you did this project. And they should be coming here to be schooled in how to do their work in fighting poverty by all of you. Okay, finally, fourth moment. Yeah, so just a pause to all of you. Robin and I have learned a lot about how to do good work. We've spent a lot of our lives in the Philippines and now in El Salvador, but we've learned a huge amount from you. So finally, I just want to say the fourth moment is the moment now that leads to the invitation to you, which is, Peggy mentioned this, the arrest of our friends. Just a little bit of background on this. So 2019, El Salvador had national elections. The two main parties who've ruled the country since the Civil War put up boring, sort of old candidates that were not inspiring. And a third candidate emerged, young, in his 30s, very hip. He now calls himself the coolest dictator in the world, a guy named Nayib Bukele, and he won. used social media brilliantly, came into office in 2019, quickly embraced our then president, Donald Trump. That gave us a notion we might not be in for a good ride. And he consolidated power by getting the country to vote his party a supermajority in the legislature, and then he methodically removed judges that were hostile to him and has created an autocracy. He then took a bold move that he knew would be popular, but in total violation of the rule of law, which is he instructed his police and military to start sweeping people up who were a part of gangs. Gangs that had caused a huge amount of violence and death there in El Salvador, but he did it in a way with no care in the world for the rule of law. So he has swept up over 70,000 people into jail. He's built the second biggest prison in the world, the biggest one in the Western Hemisphere, and tens of thousands of the people in jail are innocent. So, and in the midst of that, he got the idea he would like to start to mine again. And he knew he had the supermajority in the legislature to do that. So our friends again got out and started to protest. They started to point this out, and that's why on almost exactly 11 months ago, he arrested 5 of their leaders. We, of course, jumped back into action. And again, I'm looking at several of you who joined us right after the arrest. So January 2023, it tends to be a little bit cold. And out there in the cold, one of you brought a hand, they'd just been arrested, a handmade sign that said Free Antonio Pacheco. And over the past 11 months, you have joined us in protests at the Salvadoran embassy, in petitions. You helped us with a congressional letter that Jamie Raskin signed that called for the release of them. You helped us celebrate when all this pressure, and again, if you ever think international work isn't effective, it was that created enough pressure on the Bukele government that they released the 5 into house arrest. There's still, the charges are there. And then we sent a delegation down last month. And I will say, spending time, many of you know, or some of you know Antonio Pacheco, but to see this man who would have died if he'd stayed in jail longer, the prison conditions are horrible. Deeply grateful for the international solidarity. We showed him the photos that you're seeing of the protests outside. That's the second photo deck if you haven't put that up, but that's where we are inviting you to come on January 10th at 4 p.m. and Ross and the rest of us can give you more information. By the way, the book is for sale for $20 over there, and Ross and we'll be over there selling them after the event, and online, go to your favorite bookseller. But I want to end with a final word here, just of conclusion, of what Robin and I want to leave you with today, which is just to remind you something that was so much in the words of both Emily and Peggy, but which is each of you are potentially or actually incredibly powerful actors for equity and social justice and environmental justice. And you can do this in so many ways. We're talking about just one of them today, but you can do them, obviously, as a friend, helping people who've been wronged through injustice, as a consumer and how you purchase things, as a worker and how you press in your workplace for worker rights and also an environmentally sensible workplace. Some of you have a bit of money. You, of course, can advance these goals through your role as an investor in ethical companies and ethical stocks. But this conversation is about then stepping beyond your role as an individual. And I know many of you, I've been in local fights with many of you in Tacoma Park in Washington, D.C., so you can do it as a local citizen. Obviously, we will all be spending a huge amount of 2024 in our role as national citizens trying to save our democracy. But this work we're talking about here is honing in our muscles as global citizens. And I think this story is one that reminds us all that work is hard, and there are setbacks along the way, But it is, for us, and I think for many of you, been the most rewarding work of our lives in terms of new friends and new allies. And as this story demonstrates, it can also lead to major victories. So thank you again for your role, and looking forward to seeing many of you on January 10th.